The gang is called to solve a mystery at a local TV station, but this was merely a ruse to hide a birthday surprise for Scooby-Doo, a TV show presentation of his life, as well as a reunion with a couple of absent friends. Unfortunately, Fred and Velma aren't the only ones from the Talking Dog's past who show up for the celebration, as a ghastly robed villain once foiled by the canine also makes an appearance, determined to make this the last birthday Scooby ever sees.
Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo.
Welcome to 1984. You can tell by the opening title sequence, which was inspired heavily by the music video for Michael Jackson's Thriller. That eponymous album came out in November of 1982, but the music video for the title track wasn't released until over a year later in December of 1983. This first episode of the new Scooby-Doo Mysteries aired 9 months later, which, for Hanna-Barbera, was a fairly quick turnaround to take advantage of a fad.
Hello. 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 Hello.
Speaking of Hanna-Barbera, they never got tired of the Three Stooges, did they?
Hello? Hello? There's been a robbery at the TV station.
There's been a robbery at the TV station?
We're on our way.
Oh boy, it's mystery time!
It's a good thing there are 3 of those phones. This means Daphne, Shaggy, and Scrappy would each have one sticking out of their heads if the Mystery Machine gets into an accident, seeing as none of them are wearing seatbelts.
I'm a rabbit.
Like I get it. Today's the day we take Scoop for his rabies shot.
Considering how Scooby has never been crated and has always been allowed to run around in the back of the moving Mystery Machine, I'm actually surprised to learn Shaggy is a responsible enough dog owner to bother keeping the canine's shots current.
Scooby, now what are you doing?
Looking for my birthday presents.
Wait, Uncle Scooby, you can't look in the oven. I've got something top secret cooking in there.
I'm thrilled they will eventually replace this version of the Mystery Machine for the motorhome in 13 Ghosts. They would finally have a vehicle actually large enough to accommodate kitchen appliances, standing mirrors, filing cabinets, office desks, and the like.
My birthday cake.
What was that?
See, right there, Shaggy's voice should have been muffled by the sounds of a windshield slamming into his face. Prior to the events of this episode, a butler named Stuyvesant had been employed by Mrs. Vanderweel, the wealthy owner of the Last Hope diamond, a gemstone presumably worth millions. Stuyvesant dressed in a robe and wore a red mask shaped like a skull to hide his identity while attempting to steal the jewel, but was foiled by the gang, primarily Fred and Scooby, and vowed revenge against the teenagers. Years later, he disguised himself as the director responsible for helming a television show highlighting Scooby-Doo's life, giving the ex-butler a second chance to steal the Last Hope diamond and simultaneously ruin the lives of Fred and Scooby, by framing the former for the theft and murdering the latter.
Happy birthday, Scooby-Doo, Scooby-Doo. Happy birthday, happy birthday, Scooby-Doo, Scooby-Doo.
Undoubtedly, the reason that they sang Happy Birthday to the tune of Frere Jacques was because the traditional Happy Birthday to You song was famous for its notorious copyright protection here in the United States. I say notorious because despite how it seems like everyone has been singing this song since our grandparents were children, a division of Warner Brothers that just seems to exist to do content strikes for obscure music technically own the copyright to this song. Thus, for decades, anyone wanting to legally perform a public version of Happy Birthday to You paid a usage fee to Warner Brothers. This is why birthday celebrations in so many film and television shows use music or lyrics that nobody in the real world would think of using. This story has a bit of a happy ending, though, as the United States federal court eventually ruled against Warner Brothers because their copyright claim was essentially unprovable, and now the song is considered to have been in the public domain since 2016. Even better, the company had to pay back millions in copyright fees they had improperly charged. Oddly enough, the Scooby franchise would eventually be acquired by Warner Brothers in 2001, which would have made copyright claims against this episode moot.
I'm Mark Winkendale, your host for Here Is Your Life, Scooby-Doo.
Mark Winkendale is an obvious reference to Wink Martindale, a well-known TV show host in the 1970s and 1980s. Honestly, Mark Winkendale sounds like the real name, and Wink Martindale sounds like the parody. Here Is Your Life was a nod to This Is Your Life, a television show primarily airing in the 1950s where a guest of honor would have the events of their life showcased, as well as be reunited with important people from their past. The guest was usually kept in the dark and had no idea they were going to be on the show until the host introduced them. I can't imagine this would work in the internet age, let alone how anyone wouldn't want to sue the producers after being ambushed on live television. Now that is what Shaggy's sister should have looked like. I've been frequently asked why I hate Scrappy so much, not to mention a pup named Scooby-Doo. One of those reasons is because I've never liked child versions of adult cartoon characters. This abomination takes that loathing to a whole new level. Why would they give baby Shaggy a goatee? The elephant in the room is the whole Red Skull identity. I'm at a loss. Marvel's Red Skull is probably much more well-known today than he was back in 1984 when this episode aired, but he was still a character under copyright by the comic book company. Copyright law isn't absolute, and if a design or name is generic enough, it's sometimes difficult to enforce. That's why you can get away with creating your own character of a big muscular man in tights with super strength and the ability to fly. But the moment you color those tights blue and give the guy a backstory that he came from another planet that exploded, and exposing him to pieces of his old world makes him feel like a COVID patient, you start to get into lawyer territory. I don't feel the Scooby-Doo version of the Red Skull is generic enough to pass that test. He looks exactly like the same one featured in Marvel Comics, just not in a Nazi uniform. Perhaps a case could be made that a skull-shaped mask painted red is fine if the rest of the outfit was a generic robe, but this really seems iffy. You'd think Marvel would have sued Hanna-Barbera for this character, since the comic book company was involved in a lot of lawsuits at the time. It made me want to check if Hanna-Barbera had any cartoons that licensed Marvel properties airing in 1984. But from what I could determine, the last partnership they had with the comic book company was in 1979. They were, however, producing one of the Super Friends series based on the DC Comics characters. So you'd think Marvel would be less inclined to forgive the animation studio for copyright infringement. As mentioned earlier, though, the Captain America nemesis, and Marvel characters in general, to be brutally honest, weren't nearly as popular as they are today. So while Hanna-Barbera was able to slip their Red Skull past the comic book company's lawyers back then, somehow I doubt they'd be able to get away with it these days.
It all happened years ago when the wealthy socialite Mrs. Vanderweel purchased the Last Hope diamond, but the diamond carried a curse.
The gemstone's name was confusing. Are we meant to interpret Last Hope as in final chance or remaining option? Like getting a home run is the last hope we have of winning the game? Or was this jewel one of several Hope diamonds that existed, but for some reason what was owned by Mrs. Vanderweel was the only one still in circulation? The last of the Hope diamonds. In the real world, there was only ever one Hope diamond, and it's been in the possession of the Smithsonian since 1958. The writers no doubt used the name because of the infamy surrounding the famous gemstone, like how everyone who ever owned it supposedly suffered from a curse. The 1970s and early 1980s saw a surge of interest in the paranormal, and the Hope diamond was a popular subject of many books and TV shows. As a child growing up during that era, it was a bit of a letdown to discover years later as an adult that the whole curse thing was bullshit. Even worse, there's a good chance the rumors were spread in a cynical attempt to increase the stone's notoriety just to make it more valuable. Like something once owned by Louis XVI needed any PR to bump up its worth. This was one of the less common Scooby episodes where the villain had two separate motivations: wealth and revenge. The scheme was obviously financially worth it, as the Last Hope diamond was massive, easily surpassing the largest cut gemstones in the real world. If compared to the actual Hope diamond, currently valued anywhere between $200 and $350 million, Mrs. Vanderweel was casually wearing what was likely, in today's money, $500 million on her bosom.
Scooby-Doo, my hero! And my precious diamond is still safe thanks to you and Freddy.
I wonder how much longer it's going to be safe, considering she's wearing it out in the open like that. Presumably on the street, where any random mugger could take it from her. In real life, most owners of priceless jewelry seldom, if ever, wear them in public, and when they do, it's under controlled conditions with a reasonable amount of security surrounding them. The Hope diamond had been owned by royalty, so of course they were well protected. Well, usually. To be fair, there is precedent for treating the security of valuable gemstones cavalierly. And I'm not just talking about the Scooby-Dooverse. Here in the real world, when the actual Hope diamond was donated to the Smithsonian, the original owner sent it to the institution via the United States Post Office, in a simple box wrapped in brown paper and postage stamps. Sure, it was by registered mail and insured for $1 million, but wow. I found it annoying how the USPS lost a box of Funko Pops I ordered for my wife last Christmas. Can you imagine waiting around for your letter of thanks from the Smithsonian for your generous donation, only to find out the package was lost somewhere in Duluth, Minnesota? Then again, the fact that they did safely transport something so valuable should have been included in every commercial for the post office ever since. That wraps up discussion of the financial incentive for Stuyvesant. So what about the revenge angle? As I've said before, many times, revenge can be a valid motivation for a Scooby villain depending upon the circumstances that provoked it. Here, we're not talking about a social snub or getting passed over for a promotion, but rather having your criminal plot thwarted and getting arrested. Thus, the emotional motivation is high and worth it for the bad guy. In fact, in a situation like this, it's even better because each payout is a backup plan. If Stuyvesant was able to steal the Last Hope diamond but failed to pin it on Fred or kill Scooby, hey, he would still be rich. Likewise, if he didn't get away with the gemstone but still managed to maim or kill the people who put him in prison, he could at least rot in a cell nursing the satisfaction of his successful vengeance while slowly waiting out the years of his sentence. Stuyvesant wore two separate disguises, which would help secure his identity better than one, though this may have been pointless. He was already known as the guy who tried to steal Mrs. Vanderweel's valuable gemstone before, which also established his motivation for wanting to hurt the gang. If he couldn't provide a strong alibi as to what he had been doing at the time of the theft or attempted murder, the police would likely consider him to be a prime suspect. Stuyvesant's disguise as the director of the TV show at least allowed him a good cover and the ability to hide in plain sight. As is the case with most objects of high notoriety, I do wonder how Stuyvesant would be able to sell the Last Hope diamond. It's not something the average collector would be interested in because of the exceedingly high risk of accepting it. However, this was Stuyvesant's second attempt, and he had years to plan the crime, so it should be safe to assume he had a ready buyer. He certainly wouldn't walk away with hundreds of millions of dollars, but his reward should be enough to spend the rest of his life living comfortably somewhere without an extradition treaty.
Do you remember this voice?
Jinkies!
I do, unfortunately. It's Marla Frumpkin's version of Velma.
Yes, it's Velma Dinkley, your longtime friend, who's presently an apprentice research scientist with NASA.
Velma also worked for NASA after the gang broke up in the first live-action Scooby-Doo film. I am so glad that movie came out in 2002, because if it was a decade later, she might have been working for a certain tech company instead, and we could have been inflicted with an unpleasant cameo.
Cut it out!
out, Scoob!
Yes, it's your friend, Freddie Rogers, who's now an aspiring mystery writer.
Apparently, in this section of the Scooby-Doo-niverse, Fred Rogers went into solving mysteries rather than become a minister and help teach children kindness and compassion. Seriously, Rogers? To be fair, they wouldn't officially cement all the gang's last names until a pup named Scooby-Doo, but by this point, Rogers had been established as Shaggy's last name as recently as the final episode of the new Scooby and Scrappy-Doo show from the previous year. One final consideration about Stuyvesant's scheme. If it had succeeded in its entirety with Fred going to prison and Scooby buried in a flower garden at Daphne's family estate, everyone would have thought Fred was guilty of killing Scooby. Think about just how messed up that would be for all concerned. Fred would be out of his mind while serving his prison sentence, knowing he was innocent of everything, coupled with the grief over the death of his old canine friend, and knowing everyone thought he was to blame. Meanwhile, Velma, Daphne, Shaggy, and Scrappy would go on with their lives, not only nursing their own feelings of loss over Scooby, but with the added bitterness of thinking that one of their own was responsible. Revolta's plan to turn the Ghoul School girls into child soldiers was near the apex of evil, but wow. Stuyvesant definitely deserved kudos for the abject malevolence of his plot. That last bit, along with the monetary and emotional value of the plan and the relative safety of carrying it out, earned Stuyvesant a rare 5 out of 5 for the design. As mentioned, there were two disguises to consider this time around: the Red Skull and Milo Spender, the TV director. Each had its own separate purpose, with the former providing cover for the theft of the Last Hope Diamond and demise of Scooby-Doo, and the latter allowing the villain to safely infiltrate the studio. The Red Skull disguise is tricky to rank, because there were, in effect, two separate appearances of it. The original that happened years before the events of this episode, and what happened the night of Scooby's birthday. We were told very little about the first Red Skull case. In fact, all we know is that Stuyvesant dressed up as the monster, stole the diamond, and was subsequently captured by Fred and Scooby. Ranking this would be just like ranking miscellaneous bad guys from a Scooby montage that were unrelated to any of the actual villains in a given film or series, like the monsters unmasked by the gang in the first act of Zombie Island, or the opening credits of What's New Scooby-Doo, which still has a much better theme song than a pup named Scooby-Doo. Trev.
You haven't defeated me yet, Scooby-Doo.
The Red Skull!
What the sh**?
What the indeed, Lewis. The dude jumped out of that television like Scooby had just watched a cursed VHS tape. As this is never explained in the episode, I can't really decide if this was supposed to be considered supernatural or not. Without knowing the particulars of the first Red Skull, we have no idea how appropriate of a disguise it was. We don't know any of the backstory. Could the Red Skull have been a greedy spirit of a Vander Eel ancestor out to reclaim its diamond? Or the vengeful specter of a former servant, perhaps brutally injured when his face was ripped off by dogs kept by the wealthy family? Did the Red Skull use special effects at the time to make itself seem supernatural? We got none of that in the flashback. Just a guy wearing a disguise getting caught after stealing a jewel. Is it even important to know anything about the original disguise? After all, regardless of what happened before, the fact that the Red Skull appeared now was at least appropriate, insofar as it was meant to be after Fred and Scooby due to them having captured it previously, thus explaining its motivation for revenge. But this also illustrates the biggest flaw with this villain disguise. The original was just a man in a mask. Worse, it was a man whose secret identity was already exposed. Why would the gang assume the new one was anything other than that? Or that it was anyone other than Stuyvesant? Especially as he had the motivation for both stealing the Last Hope Diamond and getting even with Fred and Scooby. All this made the Red Skull the worst disguise to go with. However, it could have been saved if Stuyvesant leaned into the outfit and really souped up the special effects. He could have tried faking his death prior to the events of this episode with his last words being something along the lines of vowing to seek vengeance against the Scooby Gang from beyond the grave. Then, by making his outfit more supernatural by adding things like glowing paint, transparency, or floating, he would have added an element of terror missing from this disguise, which otherwise had nothing that frightening about it. Faking his death would have also solved another plot hole that I'll go over later in the operations section. As for originality, apart from the paint job, the Scooby-Dooverse has seen plenty of skeletons and guys in robes, so the Red Skull was about as derivative as you could get, not even factoring in how it copied the Marvel Comics villain. This double whammy of retreading both past Scooby designs and comic book company creations means Stuyvesant is going to be docked a point or two regardless of my promise not to focus so much on the lack of creativity of latter-day Scooby villains. As for the other disguise, just like the Beatrice Whimsy costume from the previous year's Where's Scooby-Doo story that took place on the Orient Express, the sole reason for dressing up as Spender was so that Stuyvesant could blend into the background before and after committing his crimes. Not only was this effective, but frankly, this should have been the villain's only disguise, at least from a narrative standpoint. Yes, it would have been boring for the viewers, but he might have found it a lot easier to steal the Last Hope Diamond, frame Fred, and kill Scooby without drawing so much attention to himself as he did as the Red Skull. Sticking to keeping things interesting often has to supersede keeping things smart, at least when you're trying to appeal to an audience. The Red Skull was neither inspired nor scary, and it was also not appropriate, at least not in the way it appeared in the episode. The Spender disguise, though, at least got the job done. Stuyvesant gets a 2 out of 5 for his outfit score. Happy Birthday Scooby-Doo had a lot of problems when it came to the timeline. I don't mean timeline as to how it fits in with the Scooby-Dooverse, but rather the sequence of events within the confines of just this single story.
Fred and Scooby caught the Red Skull, who turned out to be Mrs. Vanderweel's butler, Stuyvesant.
I'll get even with you kids someday. You'll see.
Scooby and I captured the original Red Skull.
But like that happened years ago.
Yeah.
Which means you had plenty of time to plan tonight's revenge. Isn't that right, Stuyvesant?
The original theft of the Last Hope Diamond was said to have taken place years ago, but we're not told exactly when. There didn't seem to be any difference between the gang's appearance in the flashback and how they looked now, which meant there could not have been that much time between these events. I'd say the original crime likely happened no more than 3 years ago at the earliest, for them to all appear not to have aged. Plus that whole Great Danes only live for about 10 years thing. If Stuyvesant had been caught stealing the Last Hope Diamond, something likely worth tens of millions of dollars, it is almost a certainty he would have been charged with felony theft, which would imply a much longer prison sentence than a simple misdemeanor. Even if it had been his first offense, it's improbable that he would have gone to trial, been sentenced, and spent long enough in prison to be eligible for parole. So why was he out now? And how did he have enough time after leaving prison to plan his revenge, which included securing a job as a television producer using a fake identity? Stuyvesant would have had to have broken out of prison almost immediately, or even before trial, just to barely give him enough time to enact his plot. Then again, considering how the cops didn't bother using handcuffs on their prisoner, the idea of such an easy escape isn't as unbelievable as one might think. There may be, however, a more sinister explanation that would have allowed Stuyvesant to have gone through the legal system, yet still managed to carry out his scheme. Is it possible that there had been an actual Milo Spender who directed the TV show, and Stuyvesant had kidnapped him to take his place? Of all the scenarios, this would make the most sense, considering anything otherwise would have required the villain to not only pretend to be a television director, but also have somehow established a sufficient work history that would have convinced a producer to hire him. I said this had a sinister implication because the logical question is, what happened to the real Milo Spender? Stuyvesant repeatedly tried killing Scooby and Shaggy. There's a good chance that if he had abducted the real Spender, He very well could have, you know. I also think it likely that Stuyvesant faked his death at some point because there had been zero police presence at the studio, and the gang had been surprised to learn that he had been the one wearing the Red Skull outfit. A normal prison breakout would have been followed by a large manhunt, which presumably would include surveillance of any of the fugitives' previous victims. Or at the very least, a phone call to those victims warning that their assailant was on the loose. It did not seem as though the gang or Mrs. Vandereel were aware of the situation. This implies the authorities had no reason to notify or safeguard them. The best explanation for which would be that they thought Stuyvesant was already dead. The inexplicable time discrepancy between the original Last Hope diamond theft and Stuyvesant's presumed arrest, trial, and sentencing to now, years later, could have been easily avoided if the villain disguise had been his ghost attacking the gang for revenge, along with the use of actual supernatural special effects. It would at least have made for a much more interesting story dealing with the ramifications of past Scooby villains, which is not something that happens much in the Scooby-Dooverse. Most bad guys are a one and done, never to be heard from again unless as a reference in modern series for nostalgia purposes.
This is the scene of the crime, guys.
There is no Z-Pop call sign for any TV or radio station in the United States, mainly because here, FCC regulations require all call signs to begin with either a W or a K, the former for stations east of the Mississippi River and the latter for those to the west. Funny enough, there is a K-pop broadcasting out of Oklahoma, and considering their format is contemporary Christian music, I can't help but laugh at the confusion those scrolling the airwaves must suffer coming upon that station, considering what the rest of the world thinks of when they hear the word K-pop. Stuyvesant's scheme also relied heavily on coincidences. In particular, the gang's appearance on television alongside the owner of the Last Hope diamond. On the surface, the TV show celebrating Scooby's birthday would make for a good opportunity, but that was asking a lot for the audience to accept when given any scrutiny. Whose idea was having Scooby on the TV show? Just how famous was he in that timeline that his life would be celebrated in front of a large audience? It would make sense if this was the same world as Scooby Goes Hollywood, where the gang were famous actors, but that's not the case here. Then again, the real-life TV show that Here's Your Life was spoofing did allow for regular everyday people to be featured if they were at least notable in their community. Going further, was this a television series that already existed and this was just another episode? Or was this a one-off special? Because if it had been a regular series, presumably Milo Spender was the regular director. This further suggests my theory that Stuyvesant kidnapped the real Spender because somebody had to have directed all the shows that came before. After infiltrating the show, did the villain call Daphne to arrange for Scooby and Mrs. Vandereel's appearances? If so, that would have been suspicious as hell in hindsight after the theft and murder. But if Daphne had innocently made the call to set up the show, how did Stuyvesant know ahead of time to infiltrate the set early enough to enact his scheme?
And the trail led us to the town graveyard.
Sure is spooky around here, eh, Scoob?
What in the hell happened to Velma, Daphne, and Shaggy? They were just in front of Fred and Scooby and could not have missed seeing the Red Skull.
Stuyvesant went to jail.
And that's how Scooby defeated the Red Skull.
Right here's evidence that long before the advent of AI, you could still get plenty of legitimate artwork with f***ed up fingers. Additionally, despite the gang having been purportedly solving paranormal mysteries for years, are we to believe a run-of-the-mill jewel theft was the most significant or interesting of them all? Enough to be showcased in the TV retrospective of Scooby's life? The original Red Skull crime consisted of little more than the villain snatching the gemstone before running into Fred and Scooby later and getting captured after falling into a pile of coffins. Classic monsters like Space Kook may not have been part of the gang's past in this series, but if the Red Skull was the most compelling mystery for them to solve, it's no wonder Fred and Velma left the group. they would have been bored out of their own skulls.
And tonight will be a monstrous night, Scooby-Doo.
Where'd that creepo go, Daphne?
I don't know, Scrappy, but look at this.
A screwdriver.
And these red screws, which means someone deliberately unscrewed those lights.
You know, I'm no professional mystery solver, but isn't there something about not handling evidence directly with your bare hands? Something about fingerprints? They just witnessed an attempted murder, and Daphne is filling that crime scene with more contamination than the kitchen at a Philadelphia Chili's.
Happy birthday, Scooby-Doo.
He said it! He said it! Like I can't run!
Quick, everybody, grab some of this crazy rubber and stretch. We'll make a safety net.
I hope it works, Scrappy.
It does!
I usually try not to delve too far into cartoon physics, mainly because it often involves a lot of math. But I have to ask, just how far up had Scooby been hanging? It took 13 seconds from the time the cable was untied to his body hitting the rubber sheet. According to several online physics calculators, disregarding air resistance, Scooby would have had to fall over half a mile to take that long to land. Setting aside the fact that the TV studio they were in had already been established to be only 7 stories tall, half a mile would be the height of the Burj Khalifa, literally the tallest man-made structure on the planet. I don't like to call stuff like this out, since keeping a good narrative pace is important, but this was just ludicrous.
Ludicrous!
3 of us will check the catwalk for more clues.
On the catwalk, yeah.
Nothing can help you now, Scooby-Doo.
You know he's a bad guy if he's making fun of Scooby's speech impediment.
Listen, Scully, old pal, my cousin's a plastic surgeon. If you let us go, I'll get you a great deal on a new face.
You caught the red skull.
I did? Well, like that's one way of putting it.
Great Danes evidently have notoriously weak tails. So weak, in fact, they frequently get broken simply from wagging them and hitting hard surfaces. It's called, and I shit you not, happy tail syndrome. In real life, Scooby's tail would already be at its limit simply holding Shaggy, who likely weighs at least 150 pounds. Add the Red Skull's weight to that, not to mention how falling would have increased the tension of the pull due to velocity, and there should have been a very large red puddle of goo on the street in front of the building, as well as the pitiable wails of Scooby yelping in agony over the bloody stump where his tail used to be. Stuyvesant gets high marks for his bloodlust, with not 1 or 2, but 3 separate attempts to kill Scooby. 2 of those put Shaggy in danger as well, which meant the villain could actually be charged with attempted murder, as there was an actual human victim involved. There is still no way to determine the legal standing of talking canines in the Scooby-Dooverse, whereas in ours, trying to kill a dog might make one face no worse than animal cruelty charges.
And someone should call the police.
Leave that to me, Mrs. Vanderweel.
If I were you, Mrs. Vanderweel, I'd make that call myself. The Scooby Gang aren't exactly known for contacting the authorities when needed. This leads to the other aspect of Stuyvesant's plot: framing Fred for everything.
Hey, but what's this thing? Some kind of fancy napkin?
Huh. It looks like an ascot.
What were you doing in there?
Looking for clues, and we found one, see?
My ascot! Yeah, I must have left it in the washroom when I was washing my face.
Far be it from me to question anyone's restroom habits, but what the hell, Fred? Why would you take your ascot off to wash your face? Did you take your shirts off too? Because if water got splashed on your ascot, it'd get all over everything. Right? I wonder how obvious it was for audiences watching this in 1984 that Fred's ascot had been missing. This may sound like a silly question, but remember that not only had he and Velma been away from the series for several years, Even when they were on the show, the focus had been on Shaggy and the dogs for a good deal of time. Modern Scooby media has greatly expanded upon the other humans in the gang, and Fred's ascot has almost taken on a life of its own, but it wasn't that big of a deal back then. I noticed it was missing right away, but I'm not so certain 12-year-old me would have back in the day.
We're glad you're here, Chief Bundy.
I came as soon as I received the call from Freddie Jones. Now what's this all about?
Oh, so now it's Freddie Jones. Mid-1980s Hanna-Barbera did not give a f***.
Freddie, where have you been?
Looking for my briefcase, and I found it too.
Hey, look what's inside it. Screws.
Just like the screws we found on the catwalk.
On the catwalk, yeah.
I'll feed the facts into my watch computer. So, who's our meanie? Here's the answer. The Red Skull is none other than Freddy! Huh?
Your what? When in the hell did Scrappy get this feature? I get the writers wanted an impartial opinion that would pin the crime on Fred based on the clues, but this was just lazy. I know I gave Shaggy and Scooby shit about jumping to conclusions about Daphne in the Lady Vampire episode, but it would have been better for them to have done that here rather than the writers tossing in a never-before-seen watch computer to take that role. Even the Batman 1966 writers would have found this contrived.
I don't even have a motive.
A priceless gem like the Last Hope Diamond is motive enough, son. You're under arrest.
No, I'm not!
Hey, come back here!
Chief Bundy had no probable cause to arrest Fred like that, considering Fred was apparently the one who called the police in the first place. The cop wasn't even there earlier to witness any of the Red Skull shenanigans, nor was there any secure chain of evidence linking Fred to the crime. At worst, Fred should have been politely asked to come down to the station for questioning. But running from the police like that was definitely a crime, regardless of him stealing the Last Hope Diamond. This was not the first time a member of the Scooby Gang was considered a suspect, and just like how Daphne's facial reactions made her look guilty in the aforementioned Lady Vampire episode, Fred did himself no favors by acting so suspiciously here. But at least his good friends didn't seem so determined to toss him under the bus.
I left my briefcase back in the washroom too. I better go get it. Be right back, gang.
Gee, Fred sure is absent-minded tonight.
Yeah, too absent-minded.
Except Scrappy seemed more than willing to toss Fred under that bus. Is this just another example of the puppy being terrible? Or is this an indication that in this timeline, all the adventures the Scooby Gang had previously didn't involve Scrappy because he wasn't born yet, and he didn't have a long enough history with Fred to trust him unreservedly?
And here is the guest chef, Monsieur Skull! With today's gourmet delight, crêpes Scoobettes!
This bit was likely a reference to Julia Child, a famous TV chef back in the day known for her French cuisine. Also, Scooby's in drag again. That Scrappy would apparently suspect Fred of being the Red Skull could be considered a testament as to the effectiveness of Stuyvesant's actions. Except for one thing. Stuyvesant didn't seem concerned to be seen running around as the Red Skull while Fred was hanging out with the girls and Scrappy. This was extremely careless of him if he was determined to frame Fred. He had already tried killing Scooby and failed. At that point, he should have cut his losses after stealing the Last Hope Diamond and let Fred take the fall. He could always try killing Scooby later. In fact, this leads us to what is likely the dumbest part of Stuyvesant's plot. He committed his crimes during the middle of a television broadcast, in front of studio lighting and running cameras. This meant that if and when he was caught, the jury would have plenty of visual evidence of his criminal acts, making it almost impossible for even the best attorney to keep him out of prison.
Scooby-Doo has done it again! He recovered the Last Hope Diamond! And he captured the Red Skull!
Still no handcuffs. I suppose if Chief Bundy was incompetent enough to try and arrest Fred with zero cause, he can't be expected to know the proper way to secure a detainee either.
You tried to pin the crime on Freddy with his ascot and those red screws.
Yeah, and you kept trying to squish my Uncle Scooby.
This was one of the few times the gang acted understandably indignantly toward a villain for trying to kill them. Stuyvesant's actions were sloppy and relied far too much on circumstances outside his control. He was careless when it came to framing Fred and chose a location to carry out his plans that would only help build the eventual legal case against him. However, he was also extremely committed to getting his revenge, repeatedly trying to kill Scooby, regardless of any bystanders. He gets a 2.5 out of 5 for the operation. This leaves the Red Skull with a respectable final due score of 3.2 out of 5.
Happy birthday, Scooby-Doo, Scooby-Doo. Happy birthday, Scooby-Doo, Scooby-Doo.
There were only 3 candles on that cake. Usually when someone gets old enough, including as many as their age isn't practical, which is why candles shaped like numbers are so popular. 3 candles would imply Scooby was that old, which for a Great Dane would make sense, as that would put him at roughly in his early to mid-20s in human reckoning. If the original Last Hope diamond theft took place 2 years earlier, Scooby would have been 1 year old, effectively a teenager at the time, just like the rest of the gang. Also, is that chocolate icing?
No, you take the first piece of cake.
Why, thank you, Raggy.
I would like to take a moment to thank my new paid supporters on Patreon and YouTube and apologize in advance if I mispronounce any names. Passive Aggressive Wood Chipper. Thank you, Passive Aggressive Wood Cheddar. I mean Wood Chipper. Sorry about that. The horse maneuvers will be on me next time. 3 Cat Day. Thank you for bringing so much joy to the world, 3 Cat Day. May your lights forever shine in the halls of Shambhala. Before thanking my new paid YouTube members, I want to take a moment to apologize for something that happened during my first live stream, because that is directly linked to this part of my video. My friend Triv from Trivial Theater volunteered to moderate my stream, and at first I didn't take her up on the offer because, frankly, I only expected maybe 10 to 20 people tops, and I didn't want her to waste her evening. However, about an hour before my stream was set to begin, I started panicking a bit and asked her if I could still accept her help, and she graciously agreed. She also asked if I wanted her in on the mic, but I declined because there didn't seem to be enough time before the deadline to figure out how to pipe her in. In fact, it took half an hour to get the audio working properly for the stream, even though I already had everything set up ahead of time the previous week with help from my brother. Well, the stream started, and instead of the 10 or 20 viewers I had been expecting, at its busiest, there were over 100 people watching simultaneously. And before the end of the evening, it had over 700 views and more than 1,600 individual chat messages. There was no way I was going to be able to monitor the chat while playing the Scooby game and answering what questions I did manage to see. Had Triv been wired in with her mic, she would have been able to read a lot more of the questions I was given, as well as to explain other things that had been going on. Specifically, people purchasing memberships. I am a terrible YouTuber, at least when it comes to knowing everything about this platform. This is made worse by the fact that even though I started this as a hobby 5 or 6 years ago, it has evolved into another income source for me, and while it may not be my principal one, I do get regular paychecks from it. So you would think that I would be better at knowing what was going on. In my defense, as that stream was meant to commemorate my reaching 10,000 subscribers, I did not want to monetize it at the time. This was despite all the notifications that YouTube had been sending my way every time I set up a practice stream, telling me to turn this or that on so as to have as many chances as possible for viewers to pay money while I was online. As far as I knew, I turned off all that stuff, so in my head, nobody was going to be asked or able to pay to engage with that particular live stream. So not only did I miss a few notifications in chat that people had joined as a member, I completely blew it when it came to understanding that these were paid memberships, and not some channel chat perks like special emojis or different colored fonts. I seemed to recall having participated in chat rooms before where active users were able to enable free perks like that based on their channel activity. It never cost any money, but rather they were a reward for engagement. It wasn't until later when Triv explained exactly what that meant that I realized how badly I screwed up by not thanking those who joined at the time of the stream. I owe special thanks to 3Cat Day, who purchased 10 memberships for random viewers at the time. That was extremely thoughtful and gracious of them, and again, my apologies for not saying so at the time. I am planning on doing more live streams in the future, and I've already made arrangements with Triv to join me on mic so she can monitor chat and read questions to me, so hopefully I won't miss stuff like I did with my first live stream. I will probably also enable monetization options for those as well, but I just didn't feel comfortable doing that with my first one at the time of broadcast, as I knew I was going to be working out some kinks. Not those kind of kinks. So again, thank you to Triv for her help the last time and for the upcoming streams, and thank you to 3Cat Day for the membership purchases. Before I forget, I feel it's very important to give a personal shout out whenever anyone new supports me with a paid Patreon or YouTube membership, not to mention making sure they're featured in the thank you credits in my videos. Unfortunately, YouTube is not nearly as good as Patreon when it comes to managing my members, and it's very easy to miss someone. So if I don't thank you by name in the next regular video after you join, or your name doesn't appear in the credits, first of all, I am so sorry that happened. If it does, please send me a DM to let me know so I can correct it before my next video. Now, back to our regularly scheduled thanks. Crimson Dragon. Thank you, Crimson Dragon. Before the internet blew up, I used to play a text-based online game back in the 1990s on a local BBS called Legend of the Red Dragon. And I was a filthy cheater too. Though to be fair, I was only exploiting a bunch of mods that the SysOp installed for the game. William Dalton. Thank you, William Dalton. Don't be robbing any trains. Yasmin. Thank you, Yasmin. I can show you the world. No, that's Jasmine. Durian the Sleepy. Thank you, Durian the Sleepy. I've never had a durian. I probably wouldn't like a durian. I can barely handle strawberries. I'm not exactly a fruit and vegetables kind of guy. David. Thank you, David. I have an Uncle David. He's terrible. But you are not. No one listening. Thank you, no one listening. I sure hope that's not true right now. Carl Roger. Thank you, Carl Roger. I like names that let me be pretentious while pronouncing them. Timosaurus Rex. Thank you, Timosaurus Rex. Timo is Latin for fear, Saurus is Latin for lizard, and Rex is Latin for king. So thank you again, Scary Lizard King. Tyrant VT. Thank you, Tyrant VT. Tyrant means oppressive ruler, and VT is the postal abbreviation for the state of Vermont. I'm guessing you have some strong ideas about how to run a certain New England locale. Yeah, okay, sure, Jay. Yeah, okay, sure, thank you. Yeah, okay, sure, Jay. Red Squirrel. Thank you, Red Squirrel. I don't have any red squirrels in my neck of the woods, but I do have some gray and black squirrels in the trees outside my house. I don't like the gray squirrels, but the black ones are cool because they always remind me of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, having been the kind mentioned to be found in Mirkwood Forest. Stella Bella Hua. Thank you, Stella Bella Hua. I don't know how else to pronounce that. Also, while appreciated, you really don't need to join me both on Patreon and here. Hoity Toity. Thank you, Hoity Toity. Say hi to Spark Boy for me. Kawaii Kaiju. Thank you, Kawaii Kaiju. Personally, I prefer Kawaii Kaiju, like googly-eyed Godzilla from Shin Godzilla. That goofy little guy was adorable. Invader J. Thank you, Invader J. Sorry you never got your own show on Nickelodeon. Telemachus 2814. Thank you, Telemachus 2814. Again, the double dipping is appreciated, but Patreon is good enough. Thank you to everyone helping support my channel. It absolutely means the world to me. If you'd like to help, there's a link to my Patreon page in the video description, or you can click the join button somewhere at the bottom of this video to become a YouTube channel member. But please only if you're comfortable doing so. Supporters receive credit in my videos for as long as they remain a paid member, as well as a personal shout-out in the next regular video produced after they join. If you're interested in picking up some clothing or mugs, there's a link to my merch store in the video description. If you send me a photo wearing or holding anything you buy, I would love to include it in my next regular video. This means you are giving me permission to share it if you send it to me. No takebacks. Daphne, Shaggy, Scooby, and Scrappy are hired as paparazzi for a celebrity gossip magazine, and their first assignment is to interview and photograph a reclusive movie star from old Hollywood. Apparently unable to secure permission through more traditional channels, the gang disguise themselves as caterers to infiltrate the elderly actress's birthday party. It doesn't take long for their cover to be blown, and they are pursued by the estate's domestic staff of literal monsters. While the gang are running from the help, someone else is determined to help themselves to the treasures kept by the Shuttersome Shut-In. Shuttersome Shut-In. Shuttersome Shut-In, Shuttersome Shut-In, Shuttersome Shut-In, Shuttersome Shut-In, Shuttersome... Can't even make it to 5. Narrator Joe really hates scriptwriter Joe.
As of today, you're all ace reporters for Peephole magazine.
There's something about the name Peephole magazine that bothers me. Peepholes are the generally accepted term for the glass eye indoors so a resident can see who is knocking before allowing entry. Here the name was likely chosen as a humorous reference to People magazine, a popular staple of grocery store checkout counters. This joke also showed up later in many Simpsons episodes. What I don't like is how, while innocent on the surface, both the word peep and hole have separate connotations that border on the dirty. I'm not even remotely prudish, so I don't look for salacious meanings in everything. But Peephole magazine sounds like it would not have been out of place in a panel of pornographic publications purveyed by Larry Flint. I don't know. Maybe I just have a dirty mind. Orson Kane was the publisher of Peephole magazine, and for reasons unknown, decided to burgle the estate of Norma Desmond, a long-retired movie actress from the 1930s. To distract her and the rest of her household from his actions, he hired Daphne and the rest to get an interview with the recluse. While Desmond, her butler, and her pet were focused on the gang, Kane, disguised as a mummy maid, would loot the safe in the master bedroom. This is another Scooby episode that pays homage to the early days of the motion picture industry. For starters, the premise of a reclusive woman who retired from acting at a young age is both a reference to Greta Garbo, who famously quit Hollywood in her mid-30s and shunned all publicity until her death in 1990, and Sunset Boulevard, a classic 1950 film that centered around a mentally disturbed ex-silent movie actress living alone with her butler. Norma Desmond's name was inspired by Norma Desmond, the aforementioned actress character from that movie. The villain's name, Orson Kane, is both a reference to the famous actor-director Orson Welles and arguably his most famous film, Citizen Kane. Welles would have a later tangential relationship to the Scooby-Doo-niverse. While never directly starring in any Scooby media, Welles has been the subject of many impersonations over the years, and the actor who has cemented himself as the quintessential Orson Welles impersonator, Maurice LaMarche, was also the voice actor of Vincent Van Gogh after the death of Vincent Price. Look, I said it was tangential. I just wanted an excuse to bring up how awesome Maurice LaMarche is.
My butler, Franklin Stein, will show you to the kitchen.
Franklin Stein?
Walk this way.
Well, Scoop, let's do as the man says.
Okay.
Walk this way. This way.
I had been hoping to find ways of cramming young Frankenstein references into this video, but this was the only one that worked. I had wanted to do this just to make it more natural to mention that the voice of Orson Kane was provided by Kenneth Mars, who played the one-armed Inspector Kemp in the Mel Brooks film. The motivation for Kane's crime was clearly financial, as the jewelry he would have pilfered from Deathman's mansion was likely worth a lot of money. But why did he need to do this? Presumably as the publisher of a major magazine, one that had to have been successful enough to merit a skyscraper headquarters. Wouldn't Kane already be wealthy? Obviously, companies go out of business all the time, and Peephole magazine could have been in dire financial straits, and this was Kane's attempt to either stave off bankruptcy or to escape with an illegal fortune while his publishing empire went down in flames. Not that this plan went well when Ghislaine Maxwell's father pulled that same shit in real life. Regardless, the story would have benefited from some clear motivation for Kane's actions. This was, after all, long before the internet, and print publications were far from being dead or even on life support. Exact figures are elusive, but People magazine, the real-life inspiration for the company featured in this episode, was likely worth hundreds of millions of dollars in the early 1980s. Even if Kane's magazine had been facing a shutdown, he probably wouldn't have been in any personal financial danger, as he likely would have been able to comfortably live the rest of his life after selling off the magazine's assets. Jewel theft is also a boring, uninspired scheme, as is using yet another mummy in the Scooby franchise as a cover. However, if one is going to commit such a crime, stealing from a notorious recluse is a decent way to avoid capture because there's always a chance the victim may value their privacy more than recovering their property, and will eschew calling the authorities in to investigate. On the other hand, that's a big estate, and looks reasonably secluded. If you're a burglar and you get captured by someone who doesn't want to involve the police, there's a non-zero chance that the homeowner may take justice into their own hands and bury you in some quickly poured concrete under a hastily assembled tool shed. And that's for a non-supernatural situation. Considering the owner is a vampire, the butler is a Frankenstein, and the pet dog is a werewolf, even innocent visitors are in danger of disappearing, like a Jehovah's Witness knocking on Hannibal Lecter's apartment door. Kane's scheme was unoriginal and seemingly unnecessary. It was also extremely dangerous for him from a personal safety standpoint. The only thing going for it was the isolation of the victim. He gets a 1.5 out of 5 for the design. Someone asked me the other day what Scooby villain disguises were overused, and I think I said at the time werewolves because they seem to pop up repeatedly in the Scooby-Doo-niverse, including twice in just the first 2 seasons of Scooby-Doo Where Are You? I may need to revise that answer because the villain's costume in this episode is, once again, a mummy. But I will acknowledge that the maid outfit sets it apart slightly. Kane's mummy was vaguely reminiscent of the robot maid Irona from Richie Rich, due to the hair and general shape of the body. Speaking of which, I'm giving serious consideration to mummy wrappings as a fashion choice because they appear to be extremely slimming. Considering how Kane appears to be at the very least well-fed when shown at the beginning of the episode, but quite athletic later when in his mummy persona. I guess Kane's choice to dress as a mummy to infiltrate Deathman's estate was a good one, as it allowed him to both hide his features and pose as a supernatural monster that would find itself right at home working for the vampire. Though it is baffling how he was able to successfully pass himself off as undead. Franklin Stein, the butler, may have been an easy mark, but Deathman was a vampire, and she kept Woof Woof, a pet werewolf, close to her. And both of those monster types are known for their powers of perception. You would think either Deathman would have sensed Kane's human life force or the vitality of his blood, while the werewolf would have smelled the living, breathing person under the wrappings. I'm struggling with things to say about this costume because there isn't much to say about it. It's a mummy outfit, like we've seen time and time again in the franchise, with nothing very frightening or otherworldly about it. Mummies are difficult to convincingly portray as walking corpses, considering anything could be hidden underneath all the bandages. The better, scarier options are when large portions of the linen are missing, so the viewer gets a good look at the body underneath in all its ghastliness, especially the face, which is why most horror films are careful to do exactly that. This was a lesson the Scooby producers finally learned by the time they reached What's New Scooby-Doo. Unfortunately, my villain ranking videos aren't there yet, which leaves me discussing boring, unoriginal mummies like Kane's version. I'm going to give him just a little credit for choosing something appropriate for the location, but only half a point due to a critical flaw in the costume itself, which I'll go over later. He gets a 1.5 out of 5 for the outfit. Let's start this section by discussing Kane's actions that were effective. He did manage to make it inside the Deathman mansion without getting caught, and found a group of patsies brave enough, kind of, to be his unwitting helpers to distract the vampire's household while he successfully looted the valuables. And in the immortal words of Porky Pig, "Beady beady beady, that's all, Buck." Kane made several mistakes while carrying out his plot, starting with one we haven't seen in quite some time: intentionally involving the Scooby Gang with his crime. I'm not giving him any benefit of the doubt. Had he done due diligence in vetting the background of his unwitting co-conspirators, he would have learned of their extensive background in solving supernatural shenanigans. For f***'s sake, Kane ran a publishing company. If anyone had the resources to adequately research new reporters, it would have been him. I do concede that this is literally only the second episode of a brand new Scooby show, and my firm stance is that almost every series and film takes place in its own timeline. This suggests that the Daphne, Shaggy, Scooby, and Scrappy scene here may not have had all the adventures we've seen before with monsters like the Space Kook or Captain Cutler. However, it was established in the first episode that the gang had been solving mysteries for several years now, as far back as when Fred and Velma were with the group. Had Kane known about this, he might have refrained from hiring them and gone with anyone else who was less likely to interfere with his plan.
Hey, that's odd. Made Mummy set the silverware in all the wrong places. There. That's correct.
Well, some of us weren't born with silver spoons in our mouths, Daphne, and we don't know all of the etiquette and protocol of setting a table properly for a fancy dinner. I'll bet she never had to eat Hamburger Helper even once as a kid. Nevertheless, I will grant that even the most hoy of the polloi would know that this was not the way silverware should be left on a table. Indeed, Kane was likely a very wealthy man as head of a publishing company, which implies that even if, for whatever reason, he did not have staff at his own home to provide maid and butler services, he had to have attended a few expensive dinners in his life, so he had to have had at least a rough idea on the proper way to place the knives, spoons, and forks. It's conceivable that the wrappings around Kane's fingers limited his movement and could have prevented him from doing anything properly that required digital dexterity. But all he would have needed to do was angrily gesture to the cutlery in a way that would let Daphne and Scrappy know it was their job to handle the placement. Not only was this an unnecessarily stupid mistake on the villain's part, but it was also extremely clumsy on the part of the writers. Contrast this scene with a similar way by which the bad guy outed himself in From Russia with Love. James Bond realized Red Grant was suspicious when the latter ordered the wrong wine with his fish dinner. You know, we're supposed to admire the hero for recognizing a subtle mistake like that, but frankly, I could never get over just how pretentious Sean Connery's 007 often was.
I want you to get the inside scoop on famous people.
Yes, sir.
This is your first assignment.
And then I noticed that the bandages on her foot were unraveling, and underneath them was a man's shoe. The same type of shoe Kane was wearing in his office today.
This was reasonably clever foreshadowing at the beginning of the episode when Kane put his feet on the desk and showed off his shoes, but I'm going to call a foul regardless. Just because they were the same brand of shoe doesn't mean it had to have been him in the mummy disguise. There was nothing about his footwear that looked distinctive, like a white stripe or a noticeable hole or other marking making them unique. It would have been better if a piece of tomorrow's edition of Peephole magazine had been stuck to the bottom of them, and with Kane being only one of a few with access, then Daphne's leap in deduction would have been justifiable. This clue did, however, perfectly demonstrate just how impractical a mummy outfit actually is, especially in the real world. As those of us who've had surgery can attest, depending upon where on your person you're wrapped, keeping bandages in place can be a nightmare of constantly changing them out or rewrapping them, as even simple movements will cause them to unravel. I do give the animators credit for how they showed Kane's feet throughout the episode. In the beginning, they were fully wrapped, but not too long afterward, the shoes underneath were exposed. However, this also brought up a potential plot hole. Where did the extra wrapping go? There should have been a continual long trail of linen cloth following Kane wherever he went. We can possibly infer that rather than constantly stopping to rewrap the cloth, he simply cut or tore off the excess, hoping nobody would notice. That was clearly not the right way to handle the issue, as it helped Daphne deduce the maid mummy was a fraud.
I want you to get a picture of Norma Desmond.
I want Spider-Man!
Quick, let's hide in the bedroom. Look!
Hey, that safe is empty. Somebody robbed it.
You caught them.
I think it's the other way around, Miss Deathman.
What?
Look at this.
My priceless jewels.
Finally, why didn't Kane run away after getting the jewels? The other monsters were distracted by chasing the gang, which was his plan. He should have immediately left the mansion after he snagged them. Perhaps Kane heard everyone heading for the bedroom after he opened the safe, so he quickly tucked the jewelry inside his outfit and hid himself away so as not to be caught next to an open safe. Frankly, instead of hiding in the closet, he should have chased Daphne and the rest out of the bedroom. This would not only have kept the empty safe from being discovered as quickly, but he could have then slipped out the front door while Deathman and her staff were occupied with the gang.
I wonder where they are.
They can't hide from me for long. Don't let them escape!
Uh-oh, we blew it, Scoob.
I know.
That pillory was locked, but Daphne opened it easily. I hope Deathman kept the receipt.
And now, folks, it's time to play Family Ghoul, the game that pits frightening family relatives against one another on TV instead of real life.
This was a reference to a popular TV game show at the time, Family Feud, with the only difference being Shaggy not acting like a creep and awkwardly kissing all the ladies on either side. One final thought before wrapping things up. Take a moment to ask yourself, what are the common characteristics of a vampire? Based on popular depictions of the monster, there are several widely accepted traits that should immediately come to mind. Vampires have fangs. They can't go out in sunlight. They avoid garlic and crosses. They sleep in coffins. They can turn into bats, wolves, or even mist. They don't cast reflections on mirrors and cannot be photographed. I took the time to ask several people I know in real life to name vampire attributes, and it wasn't until the fourth person I spoke to before anyone mentioned the mirror and photograph thing. This may suggest that these traits aren't common knowledge, despite being featured in a pivotal scene in the most famous vampire movie of all time. If Deathman had been a real vampire with that monster type's typical characteristics as mentioned, how could she have been a movie star? Let alone be in that photograph the gang were shown at the beginning of the episode. Vampires can't be captured on film. Could she have been a normal human being while in Hollywood, but was turned into a vampire at the height of her career, making it impossible to continue in the industry because she could no longer be filmed? That would have been an amazing revelation, but unfortunately, she did say that she was celebrating her 300th birthday that evening. So the writers missed an awesome opportunity. A part of me would love to see Deathman revisited in a later Scooby film or TV show, considering how she could conceivably have been around at the same time as Simone and Lena were hunting victims on Moonscar Island. It would be incredible to see the three of them meeting up for tea, gossiping about their immortal lives, or comparing notes on the best ways to secure human victims, like the least boring version of a ladies' book club. It would have to be a separate timeline, though, considering Zombie Island takes place 15 years after this episode aired, and the gang would have been in their late 30s or early 40s. And both Scooby and Scrappy would be long gone. Incidentally, I've known all my life about the whole vampires don't cast reflections thing, but it wasn't until I started working on this script that I actually bothered to ask why that's a thing. I assumed it was magic related, or as others have posited over the years, that vampires lack a soul. And as mirrors have been considered to merely reflect our souls, any creature not having one would logically not have a reflection. I love how the pseudo-scientific explanation is because traditional mirrors often had a silver backing behind the glass, and that metal is known for its purity and effectiveness against evil paranormal beings like vampires and werewolves. We all know that silver bullets are supposed to be one of the few ways to kill the latter, not to mention simply clubbing them to death with anything coated in that element, but silver has also been known to burn vampires when touched. It makes perfect sense that any silver involved in the manufacturing of a mirror would repel the vampire's reflection. But what about film? Well, in the early days of photography, silver was a common component in film negatives, not to mention in the chemicals used to develop them. Mirrors are also used in many cameras to reflect light, so it stands to reason anything that won't be reflected in one wouldn't make it to the film either. It's interesting that in some modern stories of the bloodsuckers, digital cameras seem to have no problem taking their pictures, despite silver still being a common component in smartphones. Perhaps because the silver content embedded in the circuitry is so low, it's not enough to prevent vampire selfies. Kane successfully infiltrated the Deathman estate with his patsies and briefly got hold of the jewelry he wanted to steal. But he made enough mistakes to wipe any of that out, particularly how he included the gang in his shenanigans, like the dumbest of supervillains accidentally pushing the self-destruct button for their own hidden lairs while reaching for the TV remote. Kane gets a 2 out of 5 for the operation. This leaves the Maid Mummy with a final due score of 1.7 out of 5.
How can I repay you?
I know how, Miss Deathman. Show us your face, just once.
Like you're as young and beautiful as you were 50 years ago.
Gosh, Miss Deathman, how do you do it?
Simple. I'm a vampire. We simply must have you all for dinner.
Did the gang just leave Kane behind to be devoured by Deathman and her fellow monsters? That's kind of a harsh sentence for a simple attempted jewel theft. Though to be fair, he kind of tried doing the same thing to them. After Shaggy takes a wrong turn while en route to a pizza dinner, the gang find themselves outside the estate of a pair of eccentric inventors. After encountering a disgruntled ex-employee, Daphne insists they stay and investigate, as she has a hunch that there is more going on than meets the eye.
That's right, Louie. The Von Gizmo estate.
Don't forget the pepperoni.
And remember, no anchovies.
Anchovies? Yuck.
Since when did Shaggy and Scooby hate anchovies?
Would you do it for a Shaggy snack? A little something I whipped up. It's a pot pie with pizza crust, anchovies, pepperoni, cherries, and all in a thick chocolate sauce.
I'll do it.
Also, the gang had a phone in their van. Instead of asking the pizza place to deliver, why didn't Shaggy just ask them for directions to get to the restaurant? The pizza guy showed up at the mansion repeatedly during the show, so they had to have known the way there. Ratfield was an assistant for the Von Gizmo brothers, identical twin engineers who recently invented the Helping Hand, a floating, hand-shaped robot able to do tasks via remote control. They had intended their invention to be used for the good of mankind, while Ratfield only saw its potential for committing crimes. After getting fired, the ex-employee snuck back onto the estate and abducted one of the brothers so he could take their place and steal their work.
Oh, my. I mustn't play on the floor with your doggy. You'll get all dusty, all dusty.
What are you doing in our house?
Oh my god, I hate these guys already. The Von Gizmo brothers' voices were inspired by early Hollywood comedian Ed Wynn. It's a vocal style that's been copied by a lot of actors over the years, with the most well-known modern example being King Candy from Wreck-It Ralph. It's not nearly as bad as Joe Besser, but it's not one of my favorites either. The value of Ratfield's scheme is difficult to ascertain because he never mentioned a specific crime for which he needed the helping hands. If he had said he wanted them to rob a bank or jewelry store, that would be one thing. But the kidnapping and attempted theft we saw in the episode were merely the first elements of the bad guy's overall plan. It wasn't much different than a show about a group of cons planning a heist, but focusing solely on stealing their getaway car. There was one obvious way in which Ratfield could have made a lot of money from the Von Gizmo's invention, and it might have occurred to him after he amassed a fortune in stolen goods, but I'll go over that later in the operations section. I do try to stick to the tangible when putting a dollar amount on a Scooby villain scheme, and not future potential intentions of the bad guy. Potential intentions. Potential intentions. Potential intentions. Potential intentions. Blah! I f***ing hate scriptwriter Joe.
We developed our helping hands to benefit mankind, and now you want to use them to commit crimes?
Precisely. We will make millions.
It's unfair to give Ratfield a high rating based on what he might think of doing later, if and when his initial goal of stealing the helping hands was successful. He at least was convinced that using the invention for criminal activities would earn him a lot of money, and even if limited to simply stealing expensive things remotely, could add up in time, rendering his boast about making millions a distinct possibility. It's just that Ratfield would not realize all the potential riches he could amass.
Whoa! Oh, thank heaven! Quick, you must help us before it's too late!
Ratfield's plot involved kidnapping, which always adds a layer of difficulty, but with the logistics of the abduction, securing the prisoner, feeding them, taking care of their bathroom needs, etc. While it was helpful for Ratfield to have disguised himself as his victim, which meant nobody would be looking for the missing brother, it was still increasing his risk of getting caught. I won't call it a mistake right now, though, because it was helpful for Ratfield to safely return to the Von Gizmo estate. You'll notice I said I wouldn't call it a mistake right now. Foreshadowing. Ratfield's scheme was potentially valuable, but would take a considerably long time to reach fruition given how he seemed to intend to carry it out. It would have been worth a lot more had the bad guy given it a bit more thought. The kidnapping element was dangerous, but much of that was mitigated by pretending to be the victim. This aspect also allowed him to freely wander the estate without drawing the suspicion of the remaining brother. Ratfield gets a design score of 3 out of 5. Ratfield's disguise as one of the Von Gizmo brothers was effective at letting him infiltrate the estate, and despite being more convoluted than simply immobilizing the inventors one at a time while he stole the helping hands, it was a good choice as it kept the number of human beings from exceeding what was expected. What I mean by that is if Ratfield had worn any other disguise, the remaining twin would have immediately realized there was an intruder and likely would have contacted the police.
Hello? Anybody home? Hello?
I said, get out! You'll never get the secret of my invention!
I'm sorry, but I'm afraid you will have to leave.
Did you hear that stuff about his secret invention? Maybe Ratfield was right. Something odd is going on around here, and we've got to get to the bottom of it.
No, Daphne. No, you don't have to get to the bottom of anything. She was explicitly told to leave, so sticking around would be trespassing at this point. Even worse, all Daphne had known by then was that someone who worked for the brothers was angry over being fired. There's meddling, and then there's just being nosy. I am legitimately annoyed at her being such a busybody. The show did a poor job when it came to the timing of Ratfield assuming the Von Gizmo identity. We first saw him encountering the gang as he was leaving the estate after being fired. Daphne and Scrappy then immediately went to the mansion, while Shaggy and Scooby phoned the pizza place from the Mystery Machine. Then the four of them met the Von Gizmo brothers, one of whom was extremely rude to them. So much so that his demeanor seemed to take his twin by surprise. This implies that Ratfield had already replaced the brother. When would he have had the time to do all this, especially as we saw Ratfield going the opposite direction from the house after talking to Daphne and the rest? Did he always have a Von Gizmo disguise handy just in case he was fired? Or was he always planning on kidnapping one of the brothers? Incidentally, who opened the door for the gang? We saw the helping hand do it, of course, but the device was not autonomous. It needed an operator to function. It couldn't have been Ratfield because he would have been too busy kidnapping the brother or changing into his disguise. It couldn't have been the remaining brother either because neither one of them was holding a remote control when Shaggy and Scooby spilled into the room. Mid-1980s Hanna-Barbera did not give a f***. This was not the standard Scooby villain costume, as it wasn't meant to be supernatural or scary, but rather to simply infiltrate a location, like Milo Spender from the previous segment of this same episode. The only frights afforded to Shaggy and Scooby were by way of the helping hands, and even then, it was a single instance where the two were surprised by the floating device rather than actually being terrorized. Despite Mr. Dilly similarly using a programmable robot with his evil plan, the no-face zombie was legitimately creepy as hell, while the helping hand was just slightly off-putting. All Ratfield's disguise succeeded at was keeping him hidden in plain sight, despite his personality inviting suspicion from his victim's brother. It wasn't scary or even meant to be, and not even that necessary, which I'll go over why shortly. The phony Von Gizmo gets a 2 out of 5 for the outfit. Ratfield was not a very good Scooby villain, which stands to reason because this was not a very well-written Scooby episode. It was reminiscent of the second season of Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo, where the traditional formula was ignored to focus on the boys' hijinks rather than solving mysteries or the supernatural.
It's Pizza Louie!
What kept you?
Oh boy, let's eat. Let's
Homies?
Yuck!
No, I'm pretty sure that's pepperoni and mushrooms.
Pizza Louie! Got your pizza! Right here! Whoops. Must have left it in the truck.
I would be pissed if my pizza guy just let himself into my house like that. Does nobody respect privacy here? Wait, what am I saying? This is the Scooby-Doo-niverse, where locked doors are merely a suggestion.
There! Sink your teeth into that!
No thanks, the crust is a little too crispy.
I know what you mean, Scrappy. Papa John's is just the worst.
Mighty weird!
Nobody has paid for any of these pizzas, so why does the pizza guy keep coming back? The Scooby Gang being on the scene was conveniently coincidental to the point of being ludicrous.
Ludicrous!
It's not the first time this has occurred, and more than one story began with the Mystery Machine breaking down at a location that just happened to have a mystery brewing. But here, taking a wrong turn and looking for directions was a pathetic way to involve them, considering that there was a telephone in their van. As I said earlier, a normal person would have phoned the pizza place for directions, resulting in none of the helping hand nonsense later.
We will make millions!
Why did Ratfield discuss using the helping hands for crime with the remaining Von Gizmo brother? If his intention was to make off with the invention, talking about criminal ambitions would only make his victim suspicious and likely take steps to stop him. Ratfield overlooked the most obvious way to get rich from the brothers' invention: industrial espionage. Those helping hands were a brilliant creation. Not only were they capable of replicating human hands with incredible dexterity, making them perfect for any number of automated tasks, the devices somehow managed to defy gravity through no visible means. Even the smallest of modern drones requires a series of fans to remain aloft. The Von Gizmos seemingly stumbled upon the secrets of anti-gravity while completely overhauling the robotics field, either of which would have a massive impact on literally every industry on the planet, from aerospace to factory work or transportation to warehousing. The villain should have stolen the schematics of the helping hands, as well as a few of the prototypes and their control modules, before making clandestine phone calls to every major corporation he could think of. Ratfield wasn't limited to the business world either, as any number of foreign nations would find the helping hands an incredible boon to their own manufacturing infrastructure. Hell, the spy world would likely pay billions to get hold of tools small enough for infiltration, yet dexterous enough to carry out tasks as simple as stealing important paperwork to taking illicit photographs and even assassinations. Ratfield likely wasn't thinking that far ahead and probably had no grander ambitions than using his employer's invention to grab bags of money out of armored cars or pick pockets on the subway. To be fair, though, Ratfield never specifically said what he wouldn't do with the helping hands, and it's possible that after amassing a bunch of stolen goods, it might occur to him that he had been limiting the potential earnings. It's just that at one point, he literally laid out his intentions, and those did not include selling the design to the highest bidder. Just a vague mention of making millions. The other major mistake made by Ratfield was the most common one for a Scooby villain to make: kidnapping. And it was worse than usual this time. Even if you take into consideration that this abduction had a higher likelihood of success, considering Ratfield took the place of his victim, and thus nobody would be looking for them, it was still a dumb decision. Instead of risking his victim wrecking his plans by escaping his cell, Ratfield should have stayed around just long enough to snag the hands, remote controls, and the invention schematics. He had no reason to remain at the estate to try and convince the remaining brother to turn to crime, or worse, give him time to realize that his brother was acting suspiciously. Ratfield didn't even have to concern himself with his victim's safety, because once he disappeared, an investigation would eventually find the secret room. Shaggy easily found it after all. It's unlikely the kidnapped brother would starve before being rescued. Overall, Ratfield's best option was to have simply not done whatever it was that made the Von Gizmo brothers fire him. Stick around long enough to make copies of the schematics, purloin 1 or 2 hands and control units, and then stop showing up for work. He did risk his employers noticing the theft of their prototypes, but Ratfield was perfectly content accepting the legal risks of being caught kidnapping. How is that any better than being accused of industrial espionage? At least with the latter, he had a chance of hiding what he stole, and without tangible evidence of the crime, he would likely walk away scot-free.
Oh, no, you won't. Huh? But which one of us is it?
I smell a rat. Or should I say, a Ratfield?
Oh my god, one of the dogs acted like one and literally sniffed out the bad guy. Obviously, they couldn't do this very often in the Scooby franchise, or each episode would last no more than 5 minutes.
Enough of this nonsense!
Why did Ratfield change his clothes? He was wearing a lab coat just a few seconds ago.
Nothing can stop me!
Nothing but me! Da-da-da-da-da-da! Puppy!
What the? Give me that!
Few things can be as embarrassing for a Scooby villain than being stopped by Scrappy-Doo. This wasn't even a case of being tricked into a trap or slipping during a chase. Scrappy literally just ran up to Ratfield and swiped the controller from his hands. It's harder for me to take a bone from my dog. I will, though, give Ratfield credit where credit is due. Unlike most Scooby villains who just passively stand around after getting unmasked, he tried fighting back and managed to momentarily trap everyone, which almost allowed him the opportunity to escape. But that just makes him having been thwarted by Scrappy all the more humiliating. Still, not the worst capture. F***ing Carl the Stuntman. Ratfield committed a riskier crime than necessary and focused on the wrong way to profit from the invention. And despite fighting back when cornered by the Scooby Gang, he was still stopped by Scrappy in an embarrassingly lackluster way. Ratfield gets a 2 out of 5 for the operation. This leaves the Helping Hands hoodlum with a final due score of 2.3 out of 5.
I repeat, mighty weird.
Not as weird as a pizza delivery guy making 5 trips back to the same house after not getting paid for any of the earlier 4. And that's my ranking of the villains from the first set of episodes of the first season of the new Scooby-Doo Mysteries, shown here. As usual, the first episode of the new series started out strongly with an impressive score for this era of the Scooby franchise, only to immediately drop by the next one. I was surprised, though, with Ratfield's score, as it ended up being much higher than I would have expected. Watching that episode, I was convinced he was going to rank extremely low because it was not a good story. However, setting aside the failure of the writers, the villain himself wasn't a complete waste. Once again reminding me that analyzing the separate aspects of the bad guy's plot helps keep things fair. Even a mediocre villain should not be blamed for bad writing. That'd be like blaming Henry Cavill's Superman for being terrible when it wasn't his fault he was stuck with Zack Snyder as the director. Ooh, shots fired. I hope to see you next time. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, there's a link to my Patreon below, or you can become one of my YouTube channel members by clicking the join button. But please only if you're comfortable doing so. Supporters receive credit in my videos for as long as they remain a paid member, as well as a personal shout out in the next regular video produced after they join. There's also a link to my merch store where you can pick up clothing or mugs. If you send me a photo wearing or holding anything you buy, I would love to include it in my next regular video. This means you are giving me permission to share it if you send it to me. No takebacks. Incidentally, I mispronounced Ghislaine Maxwell's name on purpose, because f*** her.